Okay.
Okay. Dale Laitinen paints the natural landscape because of its promise of an infinite portal to the imagination. His paintings marry the underlying design of nature with objective reality to go beyond the surface appearance of things. Let me get this out of my face. Okay, there you go. Layton is a graduate of Modesto Junior College and San Jose State in California with a degree in fine art. He is a signature member of the National Watercolor Society and Watercolor West and travels widely, teaching workshops and is a national art juror. He lives and paints in a pine and cedar forest in Pioneer, California, in a house, not in the trees, just so that you know. Capturing the beauty of the high Sierras, the sight of mountain peaks, lush foliage, and flowing rivers sends one's heart racing. Painting such landscapes rewards the eyes and challenges the paintbrush to bring it to life in water media. Nice writing, by the way, Dale. Employing watercolor on an aquaboard substrata, I will demonstrate techniques I've found useful in creating paintings that meld both abstract shapes with those that describe distant vistas with formations that ignite the imagination. Using flat brushes and rounds, plus the use of tools that lift and smear the pigment, you'll see the exquisite ways the limitless vistas of the Sierras will uplift our spirit. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and excited to have a nice time painting another 22 by 30 inch Sierra scene. I was wondering, I wanted to start by showing a slideshow of a few of my works since I can't be there to bring my paintings. I would probably need someone to allow me to share screen so I can get to the.
You should be able to share it now.
Okay. All righty, let's see what we've got here. Okay. Let me get to the top of my show here. How's that looking to you? In a minute here.
That's looking good, Dale. If you want to go to whole screen, that's better. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, great. All righty. So I'm going to just show you about 4 or 5 of my paintings, and this was my my title, the first one here, and it's more of an abstract half sheet that I just started throwing color on, and of course, since have rocks in my head, I ended up with abstract rocks. So that's the way it goes with me. And I also use transparent watercolor, plus I think with this one I was still using gesso quite a bit. So some of the light areas may have some gesso in them. And so everywhere you look where you might see some opaques, that's the case there. This is one of my more enjoyable ways of producing a painting, is just using my inventive imagination to come up with something that appeals to me. So mainly thinking design, color, contrast, line, and texture when I make these kind of paintings. So this is one of my favorite Sierra paintings that I've produced, and it's a double elephant, so it's 29 by about 41 inches, something like that. And this one came to me through a backpacking trip that I took up in the Saddlebag Lake area in the Hoover Wilderness. So a buddy of mine and I went backpacking for about 4 or 5 days, painting and sketching and so forth. But I used that material to produce this painting in the studio, which I really enjoy, the idea of the reflection plus the distant snowfields and the warmth of the mountains in this scene. So another one of the subjects that I really like to paint, the High Sierra Mountains. This is Lake Tahoe, of course, and it's from Inspiration Point, before you get down to Emerald Bay, and it's looking down into Emerald Bay. So I just thought Emerald Bay would make a nice background for a grouping of trees. So the trees become more important than that real background. But what I found as I painted this, a real peaceful quality to this painting. So I enjoyed looking at this for that reason. And I hope other people did too. So it's all transparent watercolor. The last two were both transparent watercolor without any use of opaques, it looks like. So yeah, this is many years ago, so my memory fades as far as my techniques. This one is on aquaboard. So on aquaboard, that's a kind of a different animal. It's a clay substrate. So it is very malleable to lifting and moving around. So I use things like Mr. Clean Magic erasers for lifting, and just if I was unhappy with the painting, I could lift the whole thing so that I could start over if I wanted, or just big sections of it, or use the Mr. Clean Magic eraser to make nice shapes that I like and start over. Or if I'm painting a scene where I want weather, I might produce, the sense of mist over a mountain or along a seascape or something like that. So it's a really interesting surface, because once it's finished, you spray it and you no longer have to put it on your glass or mat. You just frame it however you like, if you have a panel, or you can purchase it in cradle, which is really nice. So if you just went on some website like BigClick and put in aquaboard spelled with a B-O-R-D, you find this product. Also, AmsterdamArt.com has a lot of information about this. So here's one. I think this was from the Cathedral Peak picnic area in Yosemite on, I guess that would be on South Drive. And I used to do a lot of workshops for the Paint Yosemite workshop group that Patty Allen ran back in 2000 or 1990, 2000, somewhere in there. So I would go there and paint quite a bit. It's one of my favorite spots because it's quiet. There's not too much in the way of crowds there, and you get right down to the Merced River, and then you have that beautiful backdrop of the cathedral area there. So it does look like sort of like a cathedral in my estimation. That's a 22 by 30 inch. So this is what I'm painting today. So I'm going to have this as my subject matter. So I already have a preliminary sketch drawn that I'll show you, and we can go from there. So I'm gonna switch back over to my other camera and see what we can get going here. Let's see. Oh. Looks like I'm not getting what I want here.
Dale, we're seeing your overhead camera, and
Oh, we are?
yes, we are, with the sketch on top of the watercolor.
Oh, because I'm not. So
Okay. Well, that may be because I've got you spotlit. I can
all
remove
right,
the
so then,
spotlight.
okay. All right. So here we go then. So this was just a painting I did earlier in the week that I was going to use to put in focus. It's a long shadows up in Hope Valley in a winter scene that I painted a couple days ago. I just had that there for technical purposes. So this is the sketch that I produced for that photograph I showed you. So what I normally do with my sketches is I frame it off before I start so that I have I call these my four most important lines. And you'll probably hear that from a lot of artists you talk to or have lectures from. And what that does, it establishes my biggest shape. And from that, I can decide where my other shapes are going to position. So where do I put a horizontal here for the little meadow area, the greenery? Where does this line come down? Where does this angle come down? So it's easier to position all my shapes because although I'm painting subject matter and objects, I don't think of it that way. I think of it more as shape against shape, or I'm painting relationships of shapes or relationships of shadow or relationships of color, rather than thinking in terms of objects themselves. So if I paint just putting a tree and then I don't know, well, what do I do next? It's more difficult. But if I plan it out as shape, then I have the whole puzzle together before I even start to paint. So that makes it work better for me, and it should work better for all artists. All artists shouldn't be drawing more than anything else, because that's where you learn a lot about your subject, about shape, about design, and all these things, and you become more fluid painter because of that. So just sometimes jumping in and staring at a photograph or a subject outdoors, it can be daunting. So this is like taking notes, making notes to yourself so you can understand what you want to do between the four walls of your painting. And that's sometimes how I think about it, is using the metaphor of building a house. You don't start by building the room first and then the walls around it. You start by planning it out. Where are the walls of the house? Where are the rooms? How is it divided up? And so that is going to tell you more about how the painting is going to come out than if you just went ahead and just started painting. So I'm going to just set this sketch aside. I'll try to put it up closer to the camera to see if that helps for you to see what it looks like there. So that gives you a little bit more idea how I position all the shapes. So as I paint, I'll talk more about that, but I'll just go ahead and get into my painting itself. So I've already, what I did yesterday to prepare for this class or this demo was staple down my 22 by 30 inch paper dry onto my painting board. And from there, what I did is I already drew in the design based on my sketch and my photo subject. And then to save time today, I wet the paper with my 3-inch brush. And what that does, it builds in a total wet surface, and then I can paint wet into wet on it. So I established the light of the snowfields using yellow ochre, a little bit of yellow ochre to give it an underlying warmth, and then some a cobalt blue to wash in here on the subject, and down here as well. So most of the rest of it is fairly light, and I'll be painting on that as I go. But the idea is that the snow isn't actually just always white. It can be reflected by color, may be reflected into it by the sky, by trees, by the time of day. The warmer the snow is, it's probably in the evening or in the morning, really strikingly warm. But this was more of a mid-morning, midday type of scene. And we were backpacking out of our location, and I stopped and took this photo on the way out of my spot. So this was in the Hoover Wilderness near Saddlebag Lake. One of the most beautiful areas that I've been in the Sierra. It's just, and there's been some really fantastic places that I've been in the Sierra, so that's saying something. But it's a walk to get in there. At that time, you could take the boat taxi across the lake and then hike them in. Anyway, let's get started. Enough of my going down memory lane here. So I'm going to start on dry paper. Like I said, I did the wet into wet process yesterday so that I can paint wet on dry today. So let's go to it. I don't know how well the line work shows up on the camera, but we'll see here. So I'm just dripping some water into some of my paints here, and I'll talk about my paints as I go along, and my brushes. So I'm using right now I'm using a 3-inch Robert Simmons Skyflow, and it's one of my favorite brushes for getting started. It's really big, so I can cover a lot of territory. So I always joke that I start with big brushes to cover more acreage because I get paid by the acre when I paint. So when I sell my work, so we'll use that as my impetus for going on here. I'm going to start by laying in a wash of neutral tint that I buy from through Holbein from Dick Lick. And I'm just saturating my brush with that color and or non-colors being the neutral tint. And I just use the side of my brush like this so I can get a nice edge to the snow field here. By doing that, it automatically gives me that irregular edge you find on the granite slopes. So this is my first wash in here. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty neutral. It's a cool, it's like it comes out as a cool gray. But now that this is totally wet, I can charge color into that. So I'm going to try charging in some quinacridone sienna. It's kind of a bright orange, but using the neutral tint already, it's going to neutralize that. Hard orange into a subtle grade orange this way. You can see how you can paint nice massive shapes pretty quickly with this big brush. And you know, it takes a little bit to get used to using the corner of the brush and just swiping it across, but you can get some pretty nice shapes and detail using that process. So we're going to just let that kind of settle in there like that. Now I'm going to go back to my neutral tint. And wash it in here like this. Bring it out to the edge a little bit. Again, you see I'm not using the end of my brush, which tends to give you a cutout shape. This will give you a nice textured edge to your washers there. And then dip into a little bit of the sienna and wash it in there like that. So that's, you know, that's pretty much the first layers in there. I'm gonna just let it dry now, and then I'll come back and put more detail work in it later. But for now, we're just gonna let it be like it is. And we'll repeat this process in some other areas where I have it drawn in. So I've got the same rock shapes drawn in right along this line here, this edge here. So I'm just going to do the same thing there. And again, just drag this edge of it or the side of the brush or the flat of the brush and start building the shapes in. So using, I've used some of these same brushes for years and years, and or similar ones. Not the exact same brushes, but the same style brush. And once you get used to your brush, just like with your colors, it becomes an extension of your hand and of your mind and of your creative abilities. So I like to, out of habit and out of that reason, use the same brushes over and over. And I really got to where enjoy the big brushes because they can show me big shapes. Now let's do some outliers here and bring these shapes out a little bit. Same thing on this side. We got that going there again. So, okay, we'll move on to the next area. There we go, we get that area trimmed up nice. Yeah, so the key is these edges on these rock facing areas here. Now I'll go back to my sienna. I used to use before they came out with these twin colors, I was using burnt sienna from the natural burnt sienna. But once the twin colors came out, I found them much more useful than the burnt sienna. So that's why I'm using these twin colors for a lot of my wands, especially. So if we started with a smaller, like a round brush or a smaller, even a smaller flat, what I tend to have happen is I get a lot of numerous brush strokes and dabby looking painting. So I want to work from large shapes to small shapes, big brushes to smaller as I build in. I'm just trying to add some of these thin, what I call outliers from the main body right now. So you don't need to go down to a small brush to make small shape. There are times when you do need them, and I do have small brushes, which I'll talk about soon here. So why don't we just let that area just dry down, and I'll move on to another part of the painting and continue with that. So I don't want to touch these edges so that we don't drift color from up here into the parts of the painting where I want to have integrity of my edges. So I'll just leave that as it is. Oh, I see an area where I just got this area here. So I have some rock shape coming down in the string here. Coming down the side of the mountain. Okay, so we'll just let that settle now. That's the thing I found. I like to bounce around the painting so that I don't get any, edges and blossoms if I touch a wet edge. So for me, I try to let it dry naturally. If I have to push it along, I'll use my hair dryer. But for now, I don't think we'll have to do that. So here we go. What do we want to try to block in there? I think I'll do there's a grassy meadow area that comes in here, like a spear point coming in here. So I will work with that. After that, I think I'll drop down to my little tiny 2-inch Winsor Newton 965. So I'm still working with a pretty big brush, but these are the two that I'm going to employ so far. Now, what can I mix to make a nice muted green now? So I'm going to use my nickel azo yellow. And let's try a little neutral tint with that, see if we get a kind of an interesting green here. Probably a little too yellow, maybe. Let's even with the neutral tint. Let's try a DS to drop a phthalo green, phthalo blue green shade in there. And I think that's going to do it for me. Putting the neutral tint in helps me avoid too bright of a green. So, the phthalo blue green shade is really a tough one when it comes to staining. So I want to be careful, and brightness. So I want to be careful on that. So I'll start at the narrow portion of this and just spread it out. Again, look how I'm dragging the side of the brush along the edge here and just kind of pulling it along. I get a little bit of a bulge as it goes up here to the edge of the picture plane, goes up to a larger meadow area. Along the edge, I want to make it a little darker, give it a little shadow playing along the side edge of the meadow, and a little bit of a reflection at the same time. I'm using thin burnt orange now instead of the sienna. It's a little more sedate, not as bright. This kind of gives some volume and shading to this meadow shade here. I prefer to mix most of my greens. That way I can get some more variety. Sometimes if I've used tube paints, I end up being a little bit too, go to that one tube color too much. So by forcing myself to mix greens, I learn about mixing greens, and I get more variety that way too. So now I'm going to try to use a little cobalt blue and get more of a reflective color. So now what I'm drawing now, painting in now, is the reflection of that grassy knoll area. So mainly use more cobalt blue in that reflection. Still green and still somewhat warm. Like this. Now what I'll do now is I will drop down to my tiny little number 3 Scepter Gold and use that to create a division between the reflection and the above water subject. I mean, I get a nice big blob of cobalt blue on the brush and just go in here, touch it along. Okay. I think I'm done with that part of it. I cut that down in now, so I'm just gonna start working on that, go through the other shapes and things in the paintings. Still a little bit damp up there, so let that be. Push it back too much. Now some big boulders and rocks and things coming down to the shoreline here, so I'm gonna block that in again with the colorless color neutral tint. The cool gray is how it portrays itself, and it's right in there. So I'm blocking in the big light shape first. And then later I'll come in and shade it and add some other colors in here too. Okay, so again, we have some green tones along the ledge here along the shore where it comes down. I'm going to let that just kind of blend into my block shape there. Something like that. Maybe I'll punch in a little more nickel azo into that. White spot and two in there like that. And I don't mind that it blurs into the rock face there. I'm still going to be putting other shadows in there, so no problem with that. It's kind of warm in the studio, so these edges are pretty dry, so I can go back and start working on some of those other shapes. So I got another shoulder of granite coming up off the background here, so it's going to have some trees on it eventually. But so I'm going to block that in with my neutral tint. I used to mix all my grays using complements, and then I found out about this neutral tint, and it just seems to work really nicely for the way I paint. So I kind of got hooked on it.
Dale, while you're blocking that in, we have a question that came up on how do you transfer your sketch to the large piece of paper?
Freehand. I just look at my sketch and look at my photo and just draw it in using those things I explained to you about proportion and position, the four most important lines. They already helped me with that. So I don't need to trace it onto the board to make it exact. There's always going to be things that change as I go along anyway. So I just feel like that is the way I like to work. You know, some artists will do their drawing and then they'll project the drawing onto the paper. Other artists use transfer paper or grit it out. But I'm just so used to just going for it. I just don't bother with all that other stuff.
Now, there was another comment. It looked like at some point you were painting with your left hand. Do you paint ambidextrous?
Bad hand. No, I do paint with both hands. And I was born left-handed in 1958 or 9, whenever I was in first grade. Teachers didn't like it, but I was left-handed because I couldn't use the scissors and a bunch of other stuff. So in those days they did that.
I'm sorry, Dale, but we couldn't really hear your answer. Maybe your volume needs to come up a little bit, but
It's all the way up right now.
okay. So maybe you can answer that question again about ambidextrous painting.
Yeah, I was born left-handed. So in school in first grade in Loveland, Colorado, the teacher forced me to go right-handed. And so that way, so now I'm left-eyed but right-handed. So it's a little bit disconcerting. So I find myself still resorting to left-handed in some instances. Did you hear that?
Yes, we did. Thank you very much.
Because I couldn't color very well with my right hand, I got a C in coloring because of that in school. But I've trained myself over the years to use both. Yeah, as I paint along, I end up starting to mumble to myself. So just let me know if I'm not talking up. So I made that area here darker so it sets off this brightly lit background. So this again is the neutral tint, which I go to a lot to neutralize my bright colors. Now let's try a little bit of, let's go with twin red and get a little violet into this. Not too much, so I'll just add twin red into the neutral tint. And it makes this really interesting muted violet, which I like. Okay, so I'm expanding on values from the photograph and I'm expanding on the shape of this. So I like it because it makes that perspective of this in front of this, and that's why I'm adding more contrast than I might and if than actually found in the photograph. So the photograph is only for me to be inspired by and like in a sketch of the note. And I'm putting in a little bit twin burnt orange in with the red. And
We had another question, Dale, that came up that at this point in your painting, what if you make a mark you don't like? Is there anything you can do about it? Because this is watercolor.
yeah, on paper, it's a little more difficult, but if it's still wet, I can always just dab it up a little bit or spread it out or find a way. Usually I don't try to erase it, but find a way to maybe alter my painting to suit the errant mark, you know. So yeah, paint the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser really works well for even on Arches paper, the 300-pound Arches paper. It works really well to lift. So what I would do is I wet it in clean water, squeeze it out, and then go in and lift lightly, just do light strokes so you're not sanding the paper up and overworking the paper. So it's really a good thing to do. And if I want to do smaller areas, I just cut the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser up like this. You want to get original. You don't want to get any other one with any kind of detergent or cleanser in. So you want to get Mr. Clean Magic Eraser Original. You just get it at the supermarket in the cleaning aisle. So it's been indispensable, especially when I paint on aqua. It's really great for that.
So what do you prefer, the paper or the aqua board?
Well, they both have their advantages and their drawbacks. Aquaboard, you can lift endlessly. You can paint with your magic eraser, put color back in, eliminate whole vast areas of paint, put them back in. So that's good, but it's a little more tricky to work on because it's a clay surface and it doesn't absorb as much. So so in that way, it's a little harder and tougher, but you get some exciting effects that way. This is one I did for my class on the Great Southwest through SAC Arts, and this is on aquaboard. So all I did for this is, once it was finished, is spray it, and it's ready to frame. So I frame it in a real simple frame like this, a floater frame, and I've got it, I've got it painted. So that's a lot easier than having to pay for matting and glass and things like that, because I found over the years that many galleries don't even want to handle watercolor for the reason that it's tough to ship, it's reflective, all these things. I know you can buy very expensive glass, it's non-reflective, but you still have the expensive mat and the shipping problem. If you use plastic, if you use plastic glazing, then what you're up against is scratches all the time. You move it once or twice and you've got scratches. So, I found, like many artists, that aquaboard has super advantages to it.
And what do you spray your aquaboard with?
I use a Krylon spray, UV archival. This is 1377 satin varnish, and it's archival, so it won't let your painting fade.
Thank you.
So, I'm gonna mix up a nice green here. I'm gonna use Twin Burnt orange and phthalo green. And make a nice tree green out of that. It's funny about the Daniel Smith color names on it. The quinacridine sienna is oranger than the Twin Burnt orange. So it's really a kind of a funny thing. Yeah. So here we go. I'm going to again start using the side of my brush and just build in some of these shapes here. Might be a little too dark. Up there at 10,000 feet, in the Hoover Wilderness, you get these stumpy trees. They're very dwarf-like shapes. And this is wet along here, but I'm allowing it to merge with the tree shapes so that I get, a connection to the landscape with the trees. If I want a brighter tree, a brighter green, I'll use Quin Gold with my phthalo blue green shade, and I'll get this kind of a brighter green coming up through here like this. So you can mix a variety of greens with the phthalo blue, but you have to be super careful with the phthalo color because the stain, and you use too much of it and you get real dark like this one here. Some of these trees are kind of flat topped on the edges here, and these multi trunks. But that elevation, you have such severe climate that you won't get these statuesque trees too much. And to me, they're more interesting than maybe painting a dead fir at 3,000 feet elevation. I can't put it, I see that there's a few like dead trunks and limbs here in some places. It's kind of hard to see, but I want to add them here. In some spots like this. Just for nice accents to the rest of it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna start working these, I don't. Work these trees up here, these larger, closer trees to us, and see where we can go from there. First up, missed a little bit of the rock ledge here, so I'm going back in. Blocking in some more ledges here. So let that settle in. And I'll start bringing these tree shapes down. So I'm going to make these a brighter green. So I'm going to use my gold and my phthalo green to make phthalo blue green shade to make my trees. So I'm making a puddle of that, the twin gold, quinacridone gold, and phthalo green blue shade. Sometimes the results can be, if you've never used phthalo colors, the results can be kind of disappointing because too much of it is just too much of it. Like if you put the cayenne pepper and you spill a whole bunch of cayenne pepper into your food, it's going to not do so well. I got down to my tiny number 8 brush here. Let's give it some shade here. So we'll shade this side of the tree. Mostly with phthalo blue and a little bit of neutral tint. And then I flick my brush to get these branch shapes coming up. I made the tree a little more bulky than I see it in the subject, because in the subject it looks like a long narrow column. Looks like a weird shape for a painting. So we make our decisions based on our aesthetic judgment rather than being a slave to the photograph. The photograph make just as many mistakes as anything in recording the subject. So I only use the photograph as my.
Dale, could you repeat that? We didn't quite understand how.
Yeah, when I get away from my speaker, you can't hear. What I was saying was that I'm trying to interpret the subject rather than being a slave to the photograph. So the photograph has its limitations, just like we have our limitations. So just use it to just ignite your imagination is what I'm trying to say.
So, in other words, you're using it to help you find the spirit of the location where you backpacked into rather than a direct visual representation of it.
Right. I took the photograph. That's fairly direct representation. So I want to ignite my imagination and get the feeling I felt when I was there, the power of the place. So that's why I paint rather than just only photograph. I find I have a little bit more control over my emotional content by painting rather than photographing. That's not to say I couldn't do it the other way, but I'm more of a painter than a photographer. So. So I'm leaving it empty underneath here because I'm going to add some rock shapes in there to anchor those trees down later. And I've got a big mass of trees coming up here, and I can use a little bigger brush. I'll go back to my 1 inch, 1.5 inch brush here. Get my clean gold out and mix it into this green puddle I've got here. So now I'm just using some of my messy puddles here as my source for some of my coloring. So we'll just build this tree shape way up like this.
Now, how are the brushes, the 1.5 to 3 inch brushes you're using, how are those different than what you'd buy in the hardware store if you were house painting?
A lot different. I mean, maybe with oil painting you could get away with it, but with watercolor you have to, they're designed so that the hairs of your brush close together create a reservoir of water in between each filament or hair on your brush. So basically, this is your bank of water that feeds the color that you have on the edge of your brush. So when I'm painting, what I do is over time, my brush fills up with water, and then I just dip into my water bucket, just the tip of the brush, to keep the brush nice and moist on the end, and then what color water I have in the brush feeds into that. With the depot brush, what you get is you can't get that body of watercolor into that brush. One time I was at a workshop, or going to a workshop, and a woman did bring, one of the students did bring a big wide brush from Home Depot. And I asked her, why did you bring that? That wasn't on the materials list. And she says, well, my husband said it's the same thing as what you can get at the art store. So it isn't. So that's the thing. I asked her, does your husband golf with a shovel, or does he go to the golf store and buy an expensive club? So there's tools for each discipline. That's the thing.
Thank you.
I hope that kind of answered that question. Notice when I'm painting most of my trees, I try to block them in as a mass, unless I have individual trees like up here. But here I paint the mass, and then I divide it up with darks or little details or things like that. So that may be one thing you might think about as well. I'm just adding just almost pure nickel azo yellow right here to act as ground cover for these trees and so forth. And talking about mass, building them from mass to detail. When you think about painting a subject, when you walk up to, say, you're going to paint a tree, what's the first thing you see? Oh, you see all the leaves and the little branches and all that. Well, that's the last thing you want to paint. You want to paint the underlying shape first, the substrate of the tree, the big trunk, the mass of the foliage. You don't want to necessarily, I don't want to start with detail. So even a detail-oriented painter probably would like to start that way as well. Now I'm going to shade these larger trees here, these more sedate trees, statuesque trees. So I'm just using mostly twin burnt for that, and maybe dipping into a little neutral tint and putting a little bit of green on my brush. Sides of the brush, I've been harping on that all day here, are just as important as the end of your brush.
Could you repeat that, Dale?
I said the sides of your brush are as important as the end of your brush, if not more important sometimes. So you see me scrape with this brush into the paper, just like I've done with this brush, just like I did up here in some of these areas. Back to my big 2-inch brush and dipping into my good old neutral tint. Most of my brands are that I purchased, like all the Quinn colors and all the other colors, I use Daniel Smith colors. I like the cooler neutral tint of Holbein. That's why I buy that from Holbein. Yeah, maybe I'll make that a little darker. So I'll dip into the little heavier amount of the same color I was using, the twin burned orange and the neutral tint, and work that in a little darker. So I'm putting it in a little darker here. I usually stand when I paint. Well, I would say 100% of the time I stand up when I paint so that I have freedom of movement of my arms, and especially when I paint large pieces. This is a 22 by 30. I can, move over or use my left hand over here. So, yeah, it's. I think it's important to stand if you can. Now I'm blocking in some rock shadows here that I find. I just kind of coaxing that gray color out to the edge of the paper right here. I just washing my wet brush over in there. So there we have a nice dark shadow on that foreground rock ledge there. I might brighten it up with a little blue. So I'm using cobalt blue in here a little bit to kind of wash it in, charge it into this wet wash and give it a little color flash with the blue like that. I'm going to continue with the tree shapes, and then I'm going to bounce up to layer some of the rock ledges up here. I'm using Quinn Gold with my phthalo blue and a little bit of Quinburn orange. Again, I'm massing in the big shapes, not each tree separately. Again, everything in the universe is connected to every other thing, so I can connect these all together. Well, we really have only an illusion of separateness as a human being. We're actually all pretty well connected together in some way. I just started throwing a little philosophy in there.
Oh, we like your philosophical musings. Thank you.
Do I have a time limit on this? Is there time, a drop dead date?
You get another half hour.
Oh, all right, I'll be done. Notice how my brush starts speeding up when I heard that. Sticking to the same color mixtures for these trees, the Quinn Gold and the phthalo blue. Very little phthalo blue, mostly Quinn Gold. Otherwise, you're going to get a dark, inky blue. And also charge in some Quinn burnt orange into this.
Now, I understand you also do some oil painting. Do you find that you work wet into wet on your oil paintings because of your background with watercolor?
Well, I don't work wet into wet like a watercolor, but I work into wet paint but I use a lot of brushwork, so I'm not necessarily painting like a watercolor, but I guess some of my watercolor training experience has gravitated to that. But I think on my website, I might have some oil paints of my dams and engineering projects. And you can see how I use it there. I don't paint a lot in it, but I would like to paint more, but it seems like I make my living with watercolor, so that keeps me busy. If you go to Gallery Petroglyph with a silent E on the end, gallerypetroglyph.com, you can maybe see some of my oils there. The big one of Half Dome is there. So that might give you an idea how I paint in oil. I got all the way out to the edge finally. There we go. So I've got the blocking in of the light mass. Now what I can do is go in and work with some darker shapes. For the shadows on here. So I'm going to come in and shade these. Now I can differentiate one tree from another a little bit better.
We have another question. At this point, how much do you refer to your photo or original sketch, or do you just go with the intuition and aesthetic sensibilities at this point in the painting?
Yeah, so a lot of it is that, you know, I have the photo taped up to my light pole here, but I just look at it for just general information, but mostly I'm just off the reservation, you could say.
Some artists say that at this point, the painting is talking to them and they listen to the painting.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a transition. You start to ignore the subject matter and work on responding to what's happening on the surface. Because at some point, you're going to be disappointed if you're trying to always go to that photograph. There are ways to paint a photograph to look like a photograph. Example being all the photorealism that has come about in the past years. So there is that, and it's always a choice you make when you're as an artist, whether you want to adhere more to the photograph or whether you want to, go your own way. I think part of it is I don't have the patience to spend time nitpicking a painting. Well, I recently juried one of the jury panels on the NWS National Watercolor Society, and there you saw everything from just splashy, loose abstracts to highly detailed still lifes and things like that. So there is that. That's why I think watercolor is a real versatile medium. I've seen comments on different programs or talks and things where I think it was Cockney said that he never painted very tightly with watercolor because it's not a medium you could do that with. And I think he's entirely wrong. He just didn't have the experience with watercolor. And I've heard that from other artists who don't use watercolor. It's because they don't use watercolor. That's why they don't know that. or they don't pay attention to the shows that are out there, the books that are out there, so they don't know that. Or they're, you know, they don't have that technical know-how to do that. Now I'm putting in some dark, mostly sunburned orange and a little bit of phthalo for some of these tree trunks in here. I put most of this wet into wet here, these trees. So you can see how I started with a flat green wash over the whole area. Now they're becoming individual. So my advice to a painter is go your own way. You know, be inspired by something like what I am doing or whatever it is that you're inspired by. But go your own way. Let yourself become part of the painting. Your brushwork is your kind of your way to create your language, the language of your landscape or your still life or whatever. Okay, that's kind of getting a little bit mushy, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I go into any other areas. When I start to see it kind of dulling down, still wet, but it's getting damp, just damp, I'll start to get these little spots here and there. So I say, it's just going to get worse if I keep that up. So that's where I'm responding to what the painting is telling me, right? So, so I'm just going to let that dry and then go on and work on some other area. Same thing happens when I get an area that seems kind of muddy to me and I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. What I do is just leave it alone, go to some other part of the painting, and sometimes it works out where you can just work it into the painting. So don't despair and just keep going. And if it doesn't work out, there's more, Arches will sell you a lot more paper. There's a lot of paper out there.
At any point, would you be using your hair dryer here?
It's about 80 degrees here, so it's drying fast. And if I was doing this maybe in November, yeah, I'd say so. I've got it here just in case, I need to push it, I don't like to use it unless I have to use it. I'm building up the textures on this rock face. Just smearing the brush again with the side of my brush and just tipping the corner a little bit. Going a little cobalt blue for variety. The darker I make this, the more that snow pops out at us. by darkening this, this just becomes lighter in response. The painting just told me, oh, that's much better. Sometimes if it tells me to do something and I get disappointed in it, I'll say, why did you tell me to do that, Mr. Painting? So that warm burnt sienna that I put in here earlier, this warmth is coming through this gray tone that I'm putting on now. It gives it that underlying warmth. So that's an important thing I'd like to say. When I start a painting, I usually wash in some yellow ochre in a wet into wet with whatever other colors I need so that I get that underlying warmth to the piece. It's hard to get that warmth back in once you put the cold wash on first. So if you can wash in a warm wash underneath your layers, it starts to give a glow to it. That's not always the case because you can always charge in a little bit into a wet area, but you have to be aware that for me, it works better if I do that. If I add the yellow ochre to create a underlying warmth. It's sort of like in an oil painting where some artists will tone their piece, usually with a red. Well, I do it with a yellow to create that luminosity. I think the red would be too strong for a watercolor. So, and I don't use much yellow ochre so that it doesn't influence all the color. I don't use a lot because too much yellow will turn everything green. So the yellow ochre is more of a neutral yellow. So it works quite well in this way. So just a very faint bit.
We're getting towards our last 10 minutes of Dale's demonstration, so I think this would be a good time. If you have a question, post it into chat, and then I can ask Dale the question for you.
Okay, I'll take the water and then we'll be done. How's that?
And we're not trying to rush it, Dale. I'm just trying to encourage questions now.
Okay, well, 10 minutes, I better hurry up. Here I'm just washing in some of the color I found up here, very light grays and whites from the snowfield. I'm dragging across my reflection that I put in, one of the first things I put in now with a wet brush to kind of blur those into being more of a reflection of the meadow color. We'll take some phthalo here and some twin burnt orange, and we'll pull down some reflection. I can answer questions while I'm painting, so.
If you don't know how to use chat to ask your question, use the reaction button to put your hand up, and then I'll call on you.
Yes, I'm a really good explainer. Nobody has a question. mainly using a lot of clean gold here.
So Dale, we have a question. Have you ever worked in pastel?
Just, I'd have to basically say no. I'm too messy.
And we have a comment from Vicky Thomas who said, "It's a joy to watch you paint again. Thank you very much."
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. I wish you could have made it to Oakers, but wasn't to be.
Well, you never know. Maybe we can do something again in the future.
Yeah, that would be nice.
And if somebody wants to look at your YouTubes or something, do you have a link on your website?
No, but you said that somebody just started up, not much on there, but there's a Friends of Dale Laitinen, something like that, on Facebook. You can go to that. I quit doing Facebook because it kind of got blocked off of there because of password problem. But so I haven't been going to Facebook at all. But yeah, there's some stuff on my website. There's stuff there on my website that you can see. So.
And we have another comment from Laura Shore-Smith. Really love seeing how you use that large brush. So inspiring to see the accuracy and variety of the strokes. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I enjoy the big brushes. That's how I started in watercolor with the big brushes. So they've always been my go-to thing.
And Vicky asked for you to tell us about an upcoming workshop you have.
Let's see, live workshops. Nothing in particular right now, but I will be at the Petroglyph Gallery for a 2-day workshop in McCalmy Hill, California, on Highway 49. And that's a 2-day workshop. I think it's the last weekend in October. So if you go to gallerypetroglyph.com and search their workshops, I think they'll have all of those details for you there. And I have one over in Santa Clara at the Santa Clara Valley Watercolor Society, and that's in the first part of October, so I'll have that. And also I'm doing a Zoom series with the SAC Fine Arts where I just did one this last week, which was it was called Great Southwest, and Shape-Shifting the Great Southwest. The next one is Shape-Shifting the Weather, and that's going to be on September 10th. And then on November 10th, I'm going to do, what am I going to do there? I'm going to do a snow shadows and Hope Valley scene up here off of Highway 88. So that's what I have coming up. I'm really bad about getting stuff on my website, by the way.
Well, maybe Vicky, since you're friends with Dale, you could get us that information and Gina could post it in a newsletter.
That would be nice.
And Vicky's shaking her head, yes, so I'm sure she'll be talking to you, Dale.
Super, super. The other thing, I just got an invitation to do a little article for the Plein Air magazine. So if that comes to be, that would be something in the future too. So.
And then another thing, we're enjoying so much seeing your work in progress. Perhaps you could email us the finished painting so that we can post it at some point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some shadows I still have to put in, things like that, so. But I should let it dry and then we can come in. Probably have another half hour to, tinker with it, and then I could get it where I want it. So I need deeper shadows on some of the trees. I need deeper shadows on the reflections and so forth like that. So I want to pop this bright meadow shape out here a little bit more so it's brighter, and some of the reflections here. So I'd probably take this and re-wet it, the whole entire water area, and build those reflections a little darker. And same here, doing some of those in darker as well. So, anyway, it's been a pleasure to interact with you people on this Zoom day. Are there any other questions or comments or?
Why don't we stop your screen share at this point, and then if we've got any questions, we can ask them. But definitely, I think we would love to see the finished painting at some point. So if you could email us that image, we'll put it in the newsletter. And Vicky has unmuted herself, and so Vicky, will you be able to get together with Dale and find out information for his workshops that you can pass on to Gina for the newsletter?
Yes, Dale, would you just be able to email that information to me?
The details?
Yeah, the details on the different shows coming up and
Yeah, I'll do it.
workshops that you have planned.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Do you have
Alrighty.
my email address? I think you have my email address because we have corresponded before, VickyThomas@sti.net. Vicky, V-I-C-K-I.
Okay, I'll get you.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Super.
So do we have any other questions from anybody?
Satisfied group.
Yeah, very, very
Great.
inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Glad to have you, Dale. Really.
Really,
pleasure.
really beautiful.
I do have one quick question. Do you happen to know if your Zoom sessions, like for the Sacramento Arts, if those will be able to replay if not able to watch in person?
Yeah, they do a recording, but I don't know if it's only for people who pay for their class or not, but you'd have to find that out from Sac Arts.
No, I'm sure you have to pay. I just want to make sure that we
Yeah,
can.
I know they do record it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful to watch.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
very, very inspiring.
Kirby, is this recorded so that we could go
Yes,
back and be
This will
inspired?
be recorded for everyone who signed up for it, because we had, another 10 people that for some reason or another didn't make it today, and so we'll be sending the link for the recording to everyone who signed up for it.
Excellent, thank you.
And how long will we have the recording available?
Usually 30 days.
Okay, perfect. Because I know there were many more who signed up who just couldn't be here right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go
I
ahead
already-
and stop the recording at this point.
Okay,
Yeah, and I had put it in the newsletter that they could